Ravi, why can't Apple break into India's top 10? Is it all about the price?
It pretty much is, Emily. I mean, the biggest problem is that Apple's phones, obviously, you know that they trade around $800 to $1,000 here in the West. In India, they are even more expensive because of import duties on separate components and on the finished product. And to add to that, it is competing with Indian phones and Chinese-made phones, which in India are retailing for about $100 to $200. So huge difference in price point that Apple really is struggling to compete on that front.
Is there anything that Apple could do? I mean, they obviously sell older models of the iPhone for cheaper. They've got this new iPhone XR that is slightly cheaper, but certainly doesn't compare to a $50 smartphone.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And you know, I mean, the issue there as well is that even if Apple were to sell refurbished phones in India, for which they also need to open Apple stores, which they're talking to the Indian government about, even then, the price point is still going to be too high for the average Indian. Look, India is still a country that is very poor. The average Indian is making way less than $2,000 a year. So if you look at the amount that they're willing to spend on a smartphone, especially at the entry level for the people who are coming online now, all of which is through smartphones, they're only looking to spend between $50 and $200 at the most to use that to get online. And so Apple's nowhere near that end of the spectrum for India. And that's why Apple only farms about 1% to 2% of the Indian smartphone market.
Now, the digitization of India has been absolutely fascinating, in part because of the things you talk about in your book, just how quickly this has happened. Talk about the impact of smartphones in India, for better and for worse.
Well, Emily, it's just immense. I mean, to begin with, you have to look at the fact that for most Indians, a smartphone is not just a phone. It is not just an internet device. It is also their first camera for most Indians. It is their first video device. It is their first alarm clock and calculator as well. And so you add up all of those things for hundreds of millions of Indians, most of whom are rural. And then it becomes a device that is an everything device that brings all of these things to the table, that allows many Indians to A, be more efficient on the plus, boosts productivity. It improves their ability to access education or to enter the gig economy. Remember that the work profile of most Indians who are blue-collar workers is perfectly suited to delivery work or warehousing and packing work, which is the kind of jobs that e-commerce is creating in India. So there's a lot of all of that on the plus side, as well as the fact that 300 million Indians are illiterate, and so if they are to enter the digital economy, they're able to speak to their phones and it speaks back to them. So that form of technology has helped them as well. But there is a lot of stuff on the minus, Emily, and that ranges from an explosion in pornography in India. There is also the fact that more and more Indians are now reporting the fact that they are addicted to their smartphones. There's a name for this disease. It's called nomophobia, no mobile phone phobia, and it's a growing problem in India. And then there's also the fact that fake news, which we know that people all over the world have been susceptible to it, but Indians more so than most, again, because they are jumping from nothing straight to smartphones. And when you do that, you miss a few of the steps. You also miss a few of the sort of the cautious mechanisms that we have in the West to sort of be able to recognize and deal with fake news.
But there's also been reports of a sort of wave of violence across the country tied to what they've been seeing on WhatsApp in particular. How serious is this WhatsApp issue?
It's very serious. So look, I mean, most of us in the West have grown up with chain mails, for example, in the late 1990s, when you'd get an email, it would say, if you don't forward this to 10 people, you will be unlucky in love, or whatever the case may be. And you learn from those things. You realize, oh, I shouldn't forward this to 10 people because this is plain silly. But again, I mean, only 2% of Indians had PCs in 1999. And so, you know, that was India's internet population back then. And now all of a sudden, so many millions of Indians are discovering the internet, they're discovering PCs on their smartphones, and they're not sensitized in the same way to computing, to being able to deal with rumor, innuendo, superstitions, chain mails on WhatsApp. And the problem with WhatsApp is that you tend to trust the person who sends it to you, because WhatsApp works on the basis of a mobile number, and so it's usually coming from someone who knows you, and you trust that person. You see something, you tend to pass it on, and that ripple effect has been been very dangerous in India. A lot of fake news has been spread based on fake news and rumors. There have been lynchings, there have been Hindu-Muslim sort of attacks, and it really is something that the tech community in India is very concerned about.
Now, I want to switch gears and ask you about a couple of other U.S. tech companies trying to break into India. Of course, Amazon is having a showdown there with Walmart, which bought Flipkart. Which one of those companies, Walmart or Amazon, do you think is better positioned to dominate the Indian e-commerce market?
Yeah, well, I mean, so Flipkart is obviously older than Amazon in India, so there was a time when it had a better sort of ear to the ground and it understood how Indians purchase products. But I think that's changed, and Amazon has now, Amazon India is essentially an Indian company with, obviously the motherships backing here. And so really it's a question of who is able to discount products more aggressively. This week is Diwali, the great Hindu festival of lights in India, and so both Flipkart and Amazon have deeply discounted products, and they're really just trying to corner market share. The size of the Indian e-commerce market is still only around about $20 to $25 billion, so it's quite tiny in terms of comparison with China or the United States, and both sides are betting on the fact that this is going to grow and grow in multiples in the coming years, and their hope is that they will have brand recognition to cash in when finally the size of that pie grows and the Indian consumer, the Indian middle class, is able to spend more money. So I don't think either side is going to win in the short term. It just depends on who's willing to stomach losses in the short term to be able to profit when India finally becomes a bigger market.
Netflix is, of course, another company banking on the India market, but of course there are local competitors. There's the entire Bollywood scene. Netflix has the challenge of trying to create content that people in so many different markets around the world are susceptible to or receptive to. What do you think Netflix's prospects are in a very unique entertainment market that is India?
It is a very unique market. There are big Indian competitors. There's Hotstar, which is bigger than Netflix is in India. There's also Reliance Jio, which is really the architect of the big smartphone boom of the last couple of years, that they have sort of flooded the market with very cheap phones and also almost free data. Again, able to stomach losses in the short term to be able to control the content market in the longer term. And for all of these players, I think the big challenge is that unlike in the West, where you were spending somewhere between $50 and $100 on cable TV, and Netflix then came in and undercut them with a $10, $11 offering. India's a different market where cable to begin with was very cheap. So most Indians who have cable, which is a very small subset of the population to begin with, were paying $10, $11, $12 a month. Now, to undercut that, so Hotstar can price its product at $5 a month, Netflix is still coming in at a much more expensive $11 or $12 for India. So the challenge is very different. I think they're playing the longer term game of being able to create local content and being able to convince hundreds of millions of Indians to sign up for a product, to pay a monthly fee, which, again, as we know, Indians aren't very used to doing because they don't like to pay for content. So I think this game is different from the e-commerce game, and that's mostly because the cable pie was small and cheap to begin with.